Welcome to my 13th show, Jackie's Proof Animals Have Souls and Psychic show on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network. Welcome to new listeners too. I'm sitting in a room full of dogs who may or may not contribute to the show, so please bear with them. I encourage and thank listeners for your comments and questions, which I will explore in the following shows. Anyone who's listened to my shows before will know I'm a psychical researcher, having had many mediumistic and predictive experiences myself. That I am an author of 3 books, and they are paperbacks and ebooks. They can be bought as both. Moses Jesus the Shamans, which is mediums, and my Proof Animals Have Souls series. Proof Animals Have Souls and 500 plus celebrities go vegetarian, and all can be read independently. My website is jackiejoneshunt.com, and Jackie is J-A-C-K, like the boy's name Jack, and add I-E on the end, jackiejoneshunt.com, and my email for contact and questions is jackiejoneshunt@gmail.com. So Jackie joneshunt@gmail.com. I'm also on YouTube and Facebook, and my shows are going on my website each week and YouTube channel if you want to hear backdated shows. I'm a spiritualist and vegetarian for compassionate reasons, and both of these have been for 40 years or more now. And today I welcome Joanne Cesar, who describes herself as an evidential medium, a psychic and a reader of tarot, a reader of ribbons, buttons and crystal ball and tea leaves. Her website is madamcesar.weeblysite.com. Now don't worry, because that will be in the blog to go with the show. And Joanne's email is madamcesar@gmail.com. So it's madam with an E, CSASZAR.weebly, WEEBLY, site.com. So this will be in the blog. Joanne is 57. She has a degree in urban policy and race relations. She's worked as a social worker for many years. She has 3 grown-up children and a 22-year-old son in spirit, tragically in spirit. And she has plentiful grandchildren. Joanne lives in Doncaster, England, UK, and she has a Jack Russell pet who's much loved. Joanne has been telling me of a tragic, memorable experience of going into trance at the age of 3.5 years old in front of her grandmother. And I would like to ask and welcome Joanne to the show and ask Joanne, would she like to share that account of trance at 3.5 years old with listeners?
Yes, thank you, Jackie, for having me. I was the granddaughter of a medium, healer and tea leaf reader. Obviously, as a wee one, I didn't know that. And I used to have very strange sensations when I was stood in front of my nana. And on one occasion that I'm aware of, I was taken over by spirit. I became a complete vessel for spirit. And a gentleman wanted to talk to my nana. And I've been given the stories since that the gentleman who spoke with his voice through my child's voice box was a petty officer in the Royal Navy. He was told to go down onto the submarine that my granddad and his fellow submariners had drowned on. The submarine had gone down at its first test dive and never resurfaced. The story that was given out by the Admiralty was that it was a submariner error, that a valve had been left open. It had not been locked as the submarine dived. And it was actually my granddad's responsibility at that point to manage that valve. So my grandmother for many years had believed that her husband, a very kind, gentle man, had actually been responsible for killing all those men and himself. A burden my nana really struggled with. So in trance, the petty officer explained to my nana that he had been sent down to release this valve to give the illusion that my granddad had actually been responsible. It turned out that it was actually a design error. The submarine had the wrong dimensions of managing the water pressure and pressure around it. And it was until the 1980s that the Admiralty actually released the records, and it was declared a design fault.
And did she get any compensation for the falsifying or attempt to falsify the evidence?
Absolutely not.
That's dreadful.
Absolutely not. It was one of those things, like during the wartime, there was only so much bad news could be released at any point, and HMS Untamed was just one of those stories that was not going to be declared. So it's very sad, but, you know, there's always something comes out of difficult circumstances, and it actually meant that my nana and her friends at the Spiritualist Church all took me under their wing. So I had some wonderful early years experience with some lovely old-time mediums.
Well, that's excellent. And this happened, this tragedy happened near Dunoon in Scotland in 1943, you mentioned. And the man who entranced you, he died during the war, and he was a deep-sea diver sent down to falsify the evidence. So with his passing too, he wanted to set the record straight. And thankfully he did, and also showed that you were able to go into trance at the age of just 3.5 years old.
Yeah. And
sorry.
I was going to say, very important that my first experience was actually about declaring the truth. And that is something that's always carried with me, that the mediumship I deliver is evidential, it is truthful.
Yes.
And spirit will use me to apologise for their deeds or lack of deeds here on earth, if they choose.
Yes. So this is Joanne's 34th year demonstrating evidential mediumship in spiritualist churches in the UK. So, Joanne, would you say you are clairaudient, clairvoyant, or clairsentient, or a smattering of all three?
I'm predominantly clairsentient, and I love those feelings that your characters in spirit bring to me. Once I've got the sort of my energy is married with your loved ones through my aura, then I become a little bit more clairaudient. Now, clairvoyance is very limited, but I believe that's because as a child I could not distinguish between the humans and spirit, and it, you know, I was left being ridiculed a little bit. So I feel that what I did was I actually switched that talent off
to clairsentience more.
To clairvoyance, switched it off.
Yes, and you switched it towards clairsentience and clairaudience more.
Yes.
Yes. And you mentioned you recently sensed and heard a canary singing when you were doing a church service just recently. Would you like to elaborate for listeners, please?
That's right. I was in an area where the church is surrounded by trees, so there was bird song, and then I was absolutely convinced that I could hear a canary with its rolling song, and honed into that and asked my guides exactly what's this I'm hearing, and I was given the impression of a canary-sized bird with brown and orange feathers. Now, I've only ever known canaries as shades of yellow and yellowy green and brown, so to see an orange one was a bit, well, to be impressed with an orange one was a bit weird. And the lady I was talking to, I said, you'd understand an orange bird, like a canary, sings like a canary. And she said, oh yes, my dad kept them. So that was a learning point for me, not to just assume that all canaries are yellow and green and brown.
Yes, well, and that was giving you the
wonderful.
confidence that she was able to confirm it, which is excellent. You also
Absolutely,
mentioned...
a wonderful bit of evidence.
Yes, you also mentioned that you sensed a wolfhound next to you, and somebody in the audience actually came up to you later and said, I could see a wolfhound standing next to you. So that's a double confirmation that you're sensing it, they're seeing it. Why did the wolfhound appear in the spiritualist church?
Well, obviously I was talking to a gentleman delivering a message, and my first thought was it was his wolfhound. It wasn't, but as I'd connected with the gentleman, I'd felt some sort of spiky, prickly energy that I didn't feel 100% comfortable with. And the lady who approached me afterwards, she actually said, I saw the wolfhound as you went to speak to the gentleman, which spirit asked you to do. She said, the wolfhound came and stood at the side of you for protection.
For your protection, because of the man being a bit spiky. So that was interesting. You also mentioned to me you do crystal ball readings, but they exhaust you. Would you like to share with listeners your thoughts on that?
Well, I use all sorts of devices and tools, but it is the crystal balls that I really just need to have time afterwards to regroup my own energies. I don't know what it is about it, but it leaves me with a headache. And I feel that areas of my brain that I use for the clairvoyance and the clairaudience are different to the areas of my brain that I use when I'm crystal ball reading. It feels very intense. And the ones that I've done do have intense stories for the clients. So we're perhaps covering, some real tragic losses. We're covering perhaps domestic violence, traumatic endings and separations in relationships, but big life events. And I feel that combined with a different part of my brain being used, I think the crystal ball readings are much more intense on an emotional vibration.
Well, that's very interesting.
Well.
So what would you say your spiritual philosophy is, or a spiritual message you'd like to share with listeners?
I believe that there are messages in everything. We don't necessarily need a medium as a go-between to get those messages. We can walk down the street and have that thought going up to spirit and watch where your eye's taken. As a flower reader, I'll walk down the street and I'll taking the dog a walk, your mind drifts off. I'll ask spirit a question and my eyes will snap to a plant or a flower in somebody's garden, or if we're walking down the canal side to something, and then I look up the meaning, and there is the answer to my question. And it's even better when you're looking at a flower that is completely out of season as well.
Yes.
So spirit will do that, or they'll put a particular bird in front of you and look up the meaning of that bird, the spiritual aspect of that bird, the healing properties of a plant. Are you on a straight path? Are you on a bendy path? Is it man-made? Has it got tar macadam on it? Is it well trodden by, mud, like tracks? And just the answers are there.
By seeing symbols in everything you look at, from the mud to the path to the flower. That's very interesting. Yeah. So you feel there's messages in everything, from the flower readings, from looking into water, tea leaves, crystal balls, ribbons, trees, that there's messages in everything. So that's a good point to get across. So thank you for that. And you think we all have the ability to tap into these if we still our mind in this very busy world. You also say you do teacup readings, and you use them a bit like tarot cards, and you've got 400 teacups. One underpins the mood of the reading that the client picks, and then the client picks a second one, which they need to talk about things they need to talk about. So it gives 2 particular symbols. I need to draw it to an end now because the 15 minutes has flown in. And Joanne says she feels mediumship and psychic predictions are more helpful to those suffering bereavement and incredible life difficulties than the work she felt she did in social work. So she feels as a medium and as a psychic, she's continuing to do social work of a higher order than the past. So I'd like to thank Joanne very much for coming along. And also, I'm sure we will talk with Joanne again in the future. And her information will be on the blog that goes with this show. And this is the 13th show. So thank you very much for listening and look forward to speaking with you next time.